All right, so the overview for this activity, guys, is you're going to be completely designing a lab experiment. You're not actually going to run it. So in that way, you do have a little bit of freedom in that as long as it's somewhat within the bounds of reality, it's okay. Because you'll never actually, you can say, well, I need an electron microscope, even though that's worth millions of dollars, and you don't have one. It's okay, because you're not actually going to run the lab. Although I can't think of any reason you would need an electron microscope for this. But, okay, I once had someone who said, my plants have to go to the International Space Station. And since they didn't actually run the experiment, that was okay. Okay, so you're going to be completely designing the lab experiment to study the effect of a variable of your choice on the growth of plants. Okay, so you're going to decide what's the manipulated variable here. Okay, the variable could be nutritive. That could be the amount of water or sunlight or fertilizer or things like that that the plant is going to get, or it could be not so much amount. It could be types. Okay, it could be basically any number of things that you think would be interesting to test on a plant to see if it affects their growth. Okay, now remember, how many things can you test in an experiment at one time? One. Okay, you can only have one manipulated variable. And that's the mistake that most people make when they're designing this lab. They say, you know, I'm going to test the effect of light on plants. I'm going to put one plant in a sunny window, and I'm going to put one plant in a dark room like the basement, and I'm going to put another one under artificial fluorescent lights. And they're not all in the same room. What's the problem with that? Right. It's not just light they're testing. I mean, they are testing light. The light conditions are different, but so is the room, possibly the temperature, okay, things like that. So you really have to make sure that you're running what we call a controlled experiment, and that is that all the variables other than the one you want to change on purpose are kept the same. So things like you can't test a giant sequoia, a tomato, and a carrot in the same experiment. It's pretty hard to compare their growth. Okay, over the course of let's say a 6-week experiment, you're going to see absolutely zero change in the giant sequoia. Okay, meanwhile the tomato and the carrot could grow significantly. So you got to make sure that you're controlling all the other variables so that your experimental results are going to be valid, even though you're not actually going to run it. Okay, now the first thing you're going to start with, okay, and this is odd because we haven't had one of these yet. In real science, you start out with what's called an abstract. For lack of a better comparison, an abstract is a sales pitch. Okay? It's the way that you sell your research to somebody. Because in the real world, research costs money. And you have to get funded from somebody. So large companies will often fund science experiments on the understanding that if whatever the results are, they own them. Okay? So if you're doing some sort of pharmaceutical research and you're going to find a cure for the common cold, I would imagine that Vicks is probably going to be interested in funding your research. All right. That way, if you're successful, they now have the proprietary rights to the cure for the common cold. All right. And they are going to make billions of dollars. And you'll get a pat on the back and feel good about yourself because you sold your research to them. Unfortunately, that's the way it goes. Okay. But your abstract needs to essentially sell your research to someone. It needs to say, here's what I understand, in this case, about the growth of plants. Plants need these things. What I want to find out is if this will improve or change the growth of plants, and here's a possible application of my research. All right, is it going to allow farmers to grow more food, or is it going to allow botanical gardens to look prettier, or something? Okay, it's got to have some sort of practical application. You guys follow me there? So in an abstract, you talk about what you know, what you're going to do, and some practical applications of it. Okay, so it's a short paragraph. It's like 4 or 5 sentences tops. Okay, where you're just explaining that stuff. Then you'll have your problem. Okay, and the problem will be, well, what's the effect of whatever variable you're testing on the growth of a plant? Okay, and then you'll have your variables, your design, your manipulated variable, and you have to talk about how you're manipulating it. Okay, if you're talking about water, you probably want to have more than water and no water as your experiment. Okay, you probably want to try like differing amounts of water. All right, so this one's going to get a cup a week, and this one's going to get, half a cup a week, quarter cup a week, and this one's going to get none. All right, everyone follow me there? Okay, something like that. So you got to say how you're going to manipulate it. Then your responding variables, what are you watching for? Obviously, in general, we're looking for the growth of the plants. Wow. Okay, we're looking for the growth. This is an experiment on growth of plants. Okay, so we're looking for the growth, but you should probably tell them how you're going to measure that. There's a number of different ways. You have to consider what kind of plant you're using. If it's a plant that doesn't grow very fast, you know, maybe length or height isn't the right way to measure its growth. Maybe it's more about mass. Okay, if it's like a carrot, it doesn't grow vertically, but it makes a big root. You might want to say, well, you know, I'm going to take the mass of the whole thing when I start out, including the dirt, and then later on, each time I measure it, I'm going to measure the whole apparatus again, and I'll measure its mass each time, and then I'll know how much bigger the carrot is getting, okay, or something along those lines. But you got to say, you probably should have more than one measure. Okay, obviously length or height is a good measure, but you might want some qualitative observations in there, you know, like how it looks, you know, or how green it is, or something like that. Okay, tell them how you're going to measure the growth of the plant. And then you mention all your controlled variables. So basically your controlled variables are everything else that could affect the growth of a plant. Don't say it like that though. Okay, you probably want to list some specific controlled variables. If you're testing the amount of water, they should probably all be getting the same amount of. No, because you're testing the amount of water. They should all get the same amount of light. They should all get the same type of light. They should all be the same temperature, right? All of that kind of stuff. You need to control all those other variables that could affect the growth of the plant. Okay, so you'll have your hypothesis, your problem. Okay, then you got to come up with a list of materials. Okay, what are you going to need? In that, you would probably want to say, you know, what kind of plant you're going to use. You know, if you don't know, you can just say like a house plant or just pick something. Okay. So pick a plant. You know, are you going to need soil? Are you going to need fertilizer? What kind of things are you going to need to run this experiment? How long? Okay, so come up with a list of materials, the things that you're going to need. Also consider how long you may need to run this experiment for. That'll be part of your procedure. Okay, listing how long the experiment will run for. Okay, so come up with that list. It doesn't need to be a, you know, it doesn't need to be a page long. Realistically, what things do you need to grow plants? Okay, and for your experiment, is there any special equipment you're going to need? Growth lamps or food coloring or Gatorade or whatever it is. Okay, then include a description. Sorry, then you'll have your procedure. Okay, so a description of activities that will occur. Numbered list. First, I'm going to plant all the plants. Okay, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then recording. How often are you going to measure data? How often are you going to take data? How are you going to take that data? Right, that kind of stuff. And then that's pretty much where it's going to end. It says here, include a description of how you'd analyze the results. You might just want to write like a sentence or two about when I'm done, I'm going to look at, you know, I'm going to compare the growth data for these two plants or something. Okay, it doesn't need to be, you can't really do an analysis because you don't have any data. You haven't run the experiment. All right, so you're going to have an abstract, a problem, variables, hypothesis, materials, and a procedure. Okay, that's where it'll end. You don't have to do any analysis. You don't do a conclusion. You don't do an evaluation because it's impossible to do those without having run the experiment. Okay, everybody follow me there? All right, so things to think about again. Remember how to run a controlled experiment. You can only test one thing. You got to control everything else. Okay, and you probably want to have more than one experimental subject and one control subject. Okay, so if we go back to this idea of water, I don't want to have one plant getting water and one plant not getting water. Okay, the not getting water would be the control group. I'm going to compare my getting water plant to the not getting water plant. That one's going to die. This one's going to live. Okay, you probably want a more detailed experiment than that. Okay, now if you're talking about amounts of water, then you got, you know, plant A, B, C, and D that are all getting different amounts of water, and plant E that's not getting any. You have to have a control group that will tell you what would happen with no change whatsoever. All right. So if you're talking about light, you probably need a plant that's going to get natural sunlight for 12 hours a day. That would be a control group for that. That sort of makes sense? Okay. All right, have at her. You've still got about 20 minutes today and 50 minutes tomorrow, so should be no problem to get all that done in class. Yeah, I've never had one done on that before. That's, you can do that. Okay, it's up to you entirely. You guys can test whatever you want because we're really not actually running the experiments. So you come up with whatever you think would be interesting to test on a plant, besides setting it on fire. I think we know what'll happen then. end of class tomorrow.